facilitating this discussion this afternoon, as this region is my region. I am originally from Trinidad and Tobago. I am proud to be from Trinidad and Tobago. And just to share a bit about what life is in Trinidad and Tobago, it's all about paradise. It's all about fun, relaxation. We do work hard, but we do love to go to the beach, which I have displayed here. We do love to eat, and so I've shown you some of our lovely street foods that we have, like doubles and crab and dumpling and bacon shack. One of our greatest points of tourism is Carnival, which we have every year. I'm not sure we're going to have Carnival next year because of the pandemic, which will be very disappointing, and it would also make us lose a lot of revenue during that time of the year. And so this picture here, I'm standing here, this is last year when I took some of our students from Morgan State to Trinidad and Tobago on a study abroad trip. And we took them to the Pitch Lake. Now the Pitch Lake is the largest resource of asphalt in the world. And so we provide asphalt to all of the countries within the world. So when you're driving, what you're driving on the pitch, it comes from Trinidad and Tobago. So let's get into this and introduce our panelists and hear a bit about what their experience and what they have done in the countries that they are in. So let's start with Walter.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Walter Jose. I'm here in Oaxaca, Mexico. I've lived here about 12 years now. I've been traveling here for the last 25 years or so.
Bianca.
Hi, I'm Bianca. I live in Costa Rica, particularly in the Manuel Antonio Campos area. I live in a beautiful beach town. I've actually been here pretty newly for 6 months, and I live in paradise. It's it's a great place to live.
Great. And Crystal.
Hey everybody, I'm Crystal. I am currently in DC. I'm the program coordinator for the Patricia Roberts Harris Public Affairs Fellowship at Howard University. And I spent some time in Colombia in 2015 and 2016, both doing internships and doing little research projects as well.
All right. All right, so we'll start with the first question. And so describe a unique challenge or experience from your time abroad, and why did you select this location to live in? Anyone can start.
I can start.
Okay.
Well, for me, again, I've been here in Oaxaca for about 12 years or so, but I first studied here in undergrad when I was finishing up my sophomore year, received a scholarship to come here for a summer. And I had started coming here every summer after that experience. And one of the things that really struck me was that here in Oaxaca, people had not been taught that there was anything to fear when it came to being an African-American male. And so when I walked around the street and talked to people, everyone just kind of accepted me for whatever energy I brought to the table. And that was just a very freeing experience for me. And so I kind of always kept it in the back of my mind. And again, about 13 years ago, I decided, hey, the States is really great, but I think I'm going to try something different because of that base of just being in a place where I always felt comfortable and welcome. So I'll stop.
Yeah, and similarly, I think when I was in Colombia, something that was really interesting to me was the type of conversations around race and also the lack of conversations around race in the specific area that I was the first time I was in Medellin. And I remember specifically an experience with my friend who in the United States wouldn't be considered Black, but over there, because she was the darkest person in the room often, she was considered Black. And I was talking about the Colombian Day of Blackness, and she was like, well, Crystal, like, we're not like negras, we're morenas. And that took me back. I was like, well, I don't know about you, but like, I'm Black and I'm cool with that. And that was something that kind of kept coming up. It was cool to see how kids were having those conversations more than it seemed like the adults were. And it was cool to see like how feelings of Blackness seemed to be evolving. But that wasn't something that I was expecting. And it was interesting and exciting and challenging sometimes too.
To kind of piggyback off of what like Crystal is saying, in Costa Rica, like my Blackness was so celebrated. You know, everybody was just like, you are so beautiful, your skin. You know, it wasn't in the same way that it's a big contrast in the conversation that you have in the United States, which, you know, Blackness can be stressful. Can be the symbolism of the oppression that we're experiencing. And out in Costa Rica, you know, you can just be in your skin, you can celebrate. Yes, you know, to the Morena, to the Black woman, you know, it's kind of just like always in that sense of like uplifting who I am and what I already knew as a Black woman, but to kind of always like have that affirmation here, because I wasn't for sure necessarily living here. It's different from being a tourist of how they really were going to take me. And, you know, like many other people who travel, how do they treat Black people? Am I going to have the same experience? Am I going to have to worry about the police? And it's not in that same way. And it's really like, you can take a sigh of relief and like relax in your Blackness and celebrate it, and you don't have to worry about kind of being pulled down from the same things that you experience in the States.
Wonderful. So what I got from you all is that you enjoy the carefree living of the places that you're in. Conversations around race, it's not too much, it's not too, as heavy as it is in the US. Which is true, and then the feelings of Blackness. You are free to be Black. You can express yourself more than you can in the U.S. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then also to kind of, you know, answer, you know, the experience of being abroad, the community, the sense of community. I'm sure that y'all experience that in Latin culture. You know, I know in Costa Rica, I can walk down the street and I say, hola, pura vida to multiple people. It's, you know, although we can't really touch each other, we're still giving that sense of air kisses and hugs. And, you know, when I'm walking down the street, somebody might see me and I might be in a rush because I'm just used to that lifestyle. And they stop me in the middle and they say, hey, no, come have, you know, a cerveza or a beer with me. Come connect, come, you know, let's enjoy this moment. You don't have to rush and be busy and have a 5-year plan everywhere you're walking around. You can enjoy time with me. You can enjoy the sunset.
That's wonderful. Great. All right, so let's move on to question 2. And tell me about how did your experience as a Black American in your host country differ from living in the US? I know we kind of touched on that, but in your opinion, what is the root of difference between the two places?
I guess I'll go again. I'll start again. Well, in my case, I mean, it's always a layered response to a question like that because, you know, we have so many different experiences in the U.S. You know, and I'm not a person that had, you know, necessarily a negative experience growing up or anything that pushed me overseas. But what I will say is that, you know, I've taken students from Howard University for the past 10 years here to study abroad. And it's something I've actually been doing for about 20 years, but you know, the last 10 years kind of exclusively while I'm working here in Oaxaca. And I think what is really interesting is that we all seem to carry, if you're African American, particularly just born and raised in the United States, you have this kind of like book bag full of all the experience that you just carry around. Mm-hmm. And you feel it. Like I go to the airport to welcome the students of Oaxaca, and in Oaxaca, when, you know, it's a small airport, so, you know, the families come, people have balloons, signs, you know, it's a big event. And I come and I go to give my typical Oaxaca hug, you know, which is, you know, this is how we greet each other here. And you feel the energy the wall that's right there. So I've learned to do the side hug, as we all know, when we don't know folks that well. But you feel that burden and the challenge that the students have, and I have as a coordinator, to help them kind of take things out of that book bag and leave them to the side for a bit, so they can just walk around a little bit lighter, speak to people when they are spoken to, and in a friendly way, not to feel like they're judged. We have students who come out here and even when you say that they're beautiful, they actually don't have they're not even sure how they're supposed to respond to that. Yeah. Am I being exoticized, or what, you ain't ever seen no black people before, or, all these different things. My father, who came out here 10 years ago, at that time, a 57-year-old black man, 6'2", about my same height, and the police were riding by in a big truck with their guns and all that stuff, which is just how the police walk around here. And, they were staring at him, according to him. And so he immediately got nervous and did what most of us do, and look down when we see the cops. And they were like, "Hey, where are you from?" And they were telling him where to get a better donut. It showed that he had a donut in his hand, and he came back to the house like, "Damn, like, I'm walking around here all nervous, and these folks are inviting me out for food." And like, you could see how that experience just like opened up his mind. And so, again, that's not exactly the answer to that question in essence, in terms of personally, but I would just say that is something that I see, that somehow that U.S. life can be so heavy and burdensome. And it's really a challenge when you go someplace else to just kind of like, hey, my identity has changed here. Let me see what it is first. Let me start anew. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, everything you said, like, I feel that. I think I specifically chose to go to Columbia because there wasn't a lot of options for study abroad outside of the US or outside of very European-esque university abroad experiences. And my experience being there, for many reasons, I felt like I could breathe for a second. I think that's mostly because the baggage that you talk about didn't exist in the same way there. And it was really exciting, and it was really liberating at the same time, that it was important to think about, like, okay, that's my experience as a Black American, but what are people who are Black and in Columbia feeling every day? And so that was a really interesting experience. More to the topic of Black Americans versus like being abroad versus being here in the US, I was really interested in the perspectives of Black women and what that meant abroad. I think here there's this super wide conception that Black women are angry or bitter, and that's like the more oppressive, negative, stereotypical view. And in some ways, like, that does exist in Latin America too, but generally when people spoke about Black women, it was to praise their beauty or to talk about how happy they were, which I think there's problematic tendencies there too, because then we can talk about over-sexualization, and we can talk about like a lot of the other things, right? But it was just very interesting to experience how people were perceiving me in a different way. And so that's another thing on Colombia. And I mean, I'm supposed to speak to Colombia, but if I could speak to being in Mexico really quick too, I was there for a study abroad program, I think right after my freshman year of undergrad. And the experience was really interesting because I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me where I was in Puebla. And anywhere I walked, like, people wanted to take pictures. There was a soccer team that took pictures. And I was walking across the street, and like, there was a group of little kids, and they just start clapping. And I don't know who they thought I was, but I was like, oh, like, it was really interesting at the same time that it was kind of unnerving because I felt like I was always being watched. And it was also just kind of really interesting to see how little interaction with other Black folks people had, especially because there is a Black population in Mexico. And so those were a lot of different experiences. Oh, and lastly, to Bianca's point about the community, yes, in Colombia, in Cali, there's this huge festival. It's the largest or the second largest Black festival in Latin America. and the level of community that people like showed. Like if I was like, hey, like I'm American, because they're like, where are you from? They're like, oh, it doesn't matter, like you're Black, come chill, like let's hang out. Obviously the slang is different, but still. So I'll end there.
And you know what? Both of y'all exactly the exact same experience. To kind of just like piggyback, like whenever I see I don't really see the police here. There's really just not that much of existence. And Campos Manuel Antonio is so peaceful. You know, if you have a problem, you can know that your neighbor is there to assist you with whatever you need. You know, the first thing for them to do is not to jump to like, let me call the police for help. It's like, hey, you know, I might know my Theo or my neighbor, somebody can do it, and boom, it is taken care of. So it's that community experience. So I don't really see the police, and if I do, they might wave at me. They might be like, hey, how you doing? You know, in Spanish, of course. Make sure todo bien. Great. And you know, also one other thing is, you know, a lot of in our lives we've only heard about our Black ancestors from the States. But one thing I've really learned about is the extension of our Blackness in Latin America, and kind of learning that history. And a lot of the Ticos, not even just Black Ticos, but white Ticos do know their African history here. You know, there's a province in Limon, and a lot of people do know the history. So I've learned a lot, and it's made me push into more research and into Blackness around the world, the history around the world. And you know what? It's even made me more proud of what I already was and taught to be, of my Blackness. Like, we are around the world and we are doing it, you know? And so, you know, I'm really thankful for that, and kind of learning the experiences of other. I still have so many more people to talk to, but of really learning about those experiences of those Afro-Latinos, what their experience, what they bring to the world, because I haven't really had that much communication with them.
You know what Bianca just shared. When we take our students to Trinidad and Tobago, we take them to what we call the military museum, and so all of this history that they learn, they come out with this realization that the U.S. and countries in the Caribbean and in Latin America, they are so heavily connected, which they never knew before because they weren't taught in schools what the connection was. They just know that the Caribbean exists and it's this place where you go for parties and all that stuff, but they don't know the historical connection or the race connection in terms of Blackness. So it's really nice to see the students have that experience and come out thinking similarly to you. So yeah. All right. So let's go to question 3. Do you feel that you have privilege as a Black American citizen in the country that you're in? Why or why not? And if so, in what areas?
Yes, I'll start again. What I'll say, and it's a very simplistic example, but it is a beautiful feeling. It is a very freeing feeling to be in a situation where when you introduce yourself, people just assume you got it together. They assume like you have to prove you crazy and prove you're not intelligent versus it being kind of vice versa. So, you know, as a quick example, so in the States, you know, sometimes, you know, you say, well, I got to use this type of English when I'm around these folks so they can think I have it together. You know, I won't put a name on it, but I think most people understand what I'm saying. And that is a burden. You know, it's like sometimes, you know, I want to smile when I want to smile. I want to be, you know, friendly just because, you know, I'm feeling great today, but I don't want to feel forced and almost like something that's obligatory to put you at ease because you feel like, you know, you may have a certain assumption about me. And so, you know, when you're overseas as a Black American, it's like people see me as American first. They assume, you know, there's no concept of like, you know, a young man went to Mexico to find the Mexican dream, you know, and there's no American. Like, they know if you're here, you had the money to get on the plane, so they assume you have some more money, sometimes much more money than you actually have. So people assume that you can pay, They assume that you were there to do something positive instead of negative. And even when you meet other Americans, you know, you're almost at this, you kind of equal. You're both foreigners. You know, you're not from here. And so you just engage in people in such a freeing way where, you know, it's just whatever naturally comes up in a conversation. And I think that is maybe people wouldn't put it as a privilege, but when you live, you know, 32 years without that privilege and suddenly you're able to just kind of be yourself, it feels like that. So I'll stop there.
I'll go. Very similar, especially when I first moved here. They looked at me like I was a tourist. So all they saw was like, you know, hey, come over, you want some drinks, come over here, you want some food, you want a massage, you want to surf. And then finally, every time I'd be like, I live here. Like, y'all are gonna leave me with no money if everybody keeps asking me if I want to do a tourist thing. And it took me like 2 months before I started getting local prices, them seeing me repetitively, you know, so now the prices have really dropped down for me. But, you know, they don't see me as Black, they see me as American, you know, they see me as like a certain box. And it's very interesting to see the contrast because in Costa Rica, it's more nationalist. So me being American gives me more privilege. But the problem that they kind of have now that I know a lot more about the country is with Nicaraguans. And so the Nicaraguans are kind of just more like the oppressed group, and the way that they get treated is poorly here. So it's kind of interesting that I saw one of my friends being kind of treated poorly, and I had to use my privilege, which was, you know, kind of, you're not used to being in that position where it's like, oh no, hey, no, like you don't treat, you know, somebody like that. And, you know, for them to listen to me is very polar opposite kind of in that space of privilege. So definitely you can kind of see the difference between going back from the States and here.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd say for the simple fact of being American, you have privilege. Like, we are often taught in the US from a very American exceptionalist background where like everything revolves around the US, right? And that translates to how people are treated around the world. Of course, there's still racism and things, but when people know that you're American, you're treated differently. And I think that has really real implications for the people who are from the place, like local people from the place that you go to. I think, for example, one of my friends was talking about how he wanted to go into a shopping mall and then he was being followed and harassed. And then once he started speaking English, they were like, oh, like my bad, and like acted like they didn't know or understand when he switched back to Spanish and just kind of like brushed it off. And so I think, yeah, the privilege is real. And I think we have to constantly check ourselves on that, and make sure that we're not reproducing different inequalities that can happen. And that kind of, somebody mentioned like being seen as American first. And like, I still remember when that first hit me, because again, this is Mexico and not Colombia, but I was sitting with my friends, two of whom were white and American, and somebody walked past and was like, hey, are y'all the Americans? And we were like, yeah. And he was like, oh man, I hate Americans, and just like walked away. And I was like, oh my gosh, y'all, did you hear that? And they were like, yeah, like people don't like Americans. And I was like, but like he included me in that, because like as an African American, like I don't often feel like when people talk about Americans, they're also including me in that. And so in recognizing that he had very real reasons to not like the US, me as somebody who was born in the US, like I'm a part of that. And if I'm not trying to correct in my behaviors the things that like make people dislike Americans, then I'm just part of the problem too. I think in Colombia too, there was a joke my friend mentioned one time. He was like, oh, something, like he mentioned something about something being bombed, and it was a weird joke, but I digress. And he was like, but you would know about that because you're American. And I was like, okay. And he was like, no, I'm kidding, and talked about how our relationship made him not dislike Americans so much. But again, I think that it's really important to just think about like how are we in our actions not replicating behaviors, not like showing off wealth and stuff like that, so that way people don't dislike us, and also so that way people who are from the places that we go to aren't negatively impacted by the privilege that we have. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask Walter a question, because when I prepare students to go abroad, this is a big topic in terms of having privilege as a U.S. citizen, because I had a few instances where students went abroad and they felt as if, because they were a U.S. citizen or because they were Black American, certain things had to be done for them at certain times, and I had to check them and say, no, you are in a different country. You are not in the United States. From the minute you step off that plane, or from the minute you step onto the plane to leave the United States, that privilege has to go out the door. So how do you prepare your students for something like this?
Well, that's an excellent question. What I do, and there's many different ways of navigating this, but I do a full what they call a hazing night orientation, where we do a series of bonding exercises, leadership development type exercises, all those trust exercises, because there's a few things. When a group dynamic, I always say your best and your worst characteristics will come across when you go abroad. So if you're somebody that it's like always like you can figure out a positive spin on everything, that serves you, well when you're abroad. But also, on the other end, if you have some other traits that aren't as positive, they come out. And so, I try to create this situation where there's such a group dynamic of like we are responsible for each other, that you having a bad day language-wise, here for Spanish, but I think again we translate to any experience. If you're having a bad day, a bad moment, about to do something that I think is probably not best for the group, the environment is such that, and the culture of the group is such that I am supposed to tell you, hey, slow that down for a second. Walt wouldn't like that. Hey, let's try to leave up out of here. And so I think the bonding of the group is important because you have people from different backgrounds, ages, in terms of where they are in the school. I'm assuming sophomore or junior, senior, etc. But just people who will respond to certain freedoms, very differently. So I think that's important. I think the presence of the coordinator and director, kind of establishing early on that if you're having any issues, I have to, it is my responsibility to pull you to the side. And I actually do something where I ask people individually, okay, if you're having a bad day, how do you like to be addressed? Some people want, a conversation. Some people, need to be pulled aside, all those different things. So I try to individualize it to the extent that I can, because, I'll just like look at my notes real quick, like, okay, this person said, just give me 5 minutes before you reprimand me, that type of thing, like whatever it is, just trying to get to know the group. So I think that, that helps as well.
And so the question, just so I understand, is like, how do you prepare yourself to make sure that you're not like abusing your privilege?
How do you prepare students going into that? Because automatically they think, well, I'm American and I'm Black American. I can do whatever I want in whatever country I want. But it's not necessarily so. Once you step on that plane, that privilege goes.
Yeah.
Or you should get rid of that privilege or those ideas.
Right, exactly. And I think there's a really good article that I love to share with people. It's by June Jordan, who's an author, and she talks about Black travel and the ethics of that, and also what does that mean when we talk about consumptive tourism. So by that I mean tourism in which people are going abroad to kind of like consume a culture, take a culture, and not necessarily have a mutually beneficial relationship. And so I like to have those conversations with students. How are we making sure that, as opposed to being tourists, we are making sure that we're being like visitors at the least? Like, how would you act if you were going down the street to like your grandma's house and you didn't know everybody in the neighborhood? Like, you would probably try to like connect with some folks, especially because like you want to make sure that like you're being respectful and things like that. And so just encouraging people to think about travel like that. Like how can you be a visitor? How can you make sure that you're being humble and not expecting everything to be done in the way that you're used to because you're in a different context. I've unfortunately been in situations, study abroad, where I've seen students ask or rather demand things that were kind of extravagant and also not necessarily the way that things were done. And not only did it offend the people from that country, and this country specifically is Cuba, but it also like negatively impacted them because there was a culture shock of realizing that what I thought I was getting into isn't what happened. And so when Walter talks about like how he prepares students, I think that's great. I think to the extent that students can read about like the places that they're going to, and also read about like where are the Black communities, how are they experiencing their Blackness in this country, like that's always super beneficial.
Okay. All right. So you've been in these countries for a while. How has your perspective on race or on privilege, nationality, and social concerns changed since being there? And maybe even as you look towards what recently happened in the US, how has that impacted that as well?
Well, what I'll say is, I'm probably more confused now than I've ever been. I think when I was growing up, you read and you have conversations with your family, and you don't realize that it's very insular sometimes. Your perspective, you think you're getting perspectives from everything, but your grandmom, your mom, and the people in your school, like sometimes they all have a very similar kind of background, particularly if they're from the States. And what I'll say is, in talking about confusion, I've been here 12 years. I recognize that I'm able to, for example, I can walk around in jeans and a t-shirt, and people assume that I'm, an educated person, assume that I, because I look American for whatever reason, regardless. They assume that I'm, a good person, and always, like I said earlier, until I prove otherwise. So I recognize this. I recognize that instead of in the States, you sometimes have to buy certain type of brands of clothing. I think that's a big issue with, that's a side note, but the Black folks, we just buy a whole bunch of stuff we don't need, can't afford, just to make up people think we have some value. Somehow here, I don't have to do that. So it makes me question people in the States who have these privileges, who have had them for generations, and how they can't recognize that there's inequality. Or, when I see a George Floyd incident, suddenly awake people to a privilege and privileges that they had, or awaken them to realities of police brutality they didn't see. And I'm like, you've been on earth 40 years and you didn't get the cops treat Black folks a little different. Like, I've been here 12 years and I can already figure out that I have sometimes more experiences than an indigenous person that comes from a small pueblo or a small village here. And so, I'm more confused now than I wasn't, because it's harder for me to assess people. I don't know where certain things, certain types of thinking comes from. And so that perspective, just, almost being at peace with my confusion and just reading and talking and engaging with people and enjoying that, and being more open, that has kind of been a change for me. And what I'll also say in terms of, nationality, which is, very important, for the people who speak Spanish here, and here sometimes you'll hear the word gringo. This reminds me of something Crystal said. And I'm like, I never feel like they're talking about me. To me, gringos are white Americans or white travelers, or, maybe Canadian, but, it's basically white Americans. And it's like, wow, okay, so what am I? And then, I hear people say expat. I'm like, that don't really sound like me either. So, all these things change. And and now I'm in a point where it's like, okay, I have to actually come up with new vocabulary, because if I don't feel like those things apply to me, now I got to figure out, how to call myself and what I want others to say. So it's really interesting just how your perspective changes overall living overseas. I'll stop there.
I'll go. Some of the things that has kind of like changed my perspective is, Costa Rica is not a country that I am a citizen in. So I do have to pay attention to what's going on in the government. If they don't want any more Americans here because of the COVID-19, those are things that I have to be conscious of. And, it made me really empathize more than I already tried to. In the sense of what are our other Latin or other people, in the Caribbeans or, in African countries, what they're experiencing when they're in the States, and they're kind of worried about like being displaced in a place that they have made their home. And so it kind of just like makes me, think about that, because now being abroad, being an American does have its privilege, but right now we're not really wanted in a lot of different countries right now due to what's going on. So I'm just like, well, what happens if the government decides like Americans got to leave? I've got to reshift my life up. Not saying that will happen, but it's something that I have to always be ready for plan B or C. And then another thing that, I've been conscious of is, I do have quite a bit of friends here who are part of the LGBTQ community, and to see kind of like that impact in a Latin country. Costa Rica just passed, gay marriage. They're like the first Central American country to do that. And that's a landslide, but it's really reflective of how much we have to do as a world, as a full-on global community, to continue to allow equality. None of us are equal until all of us, have equality. And so, it makes me realize like I have got to get my head out of the clouds of just what's going on in the States and be conscious of my other brothers and sisters around the world. And that also goes for wage disparity. What I thought was poor, when you go to some people's houses, which is no judgment, if anybody offers to, allow me in their home, I'm more than gracious. But you can go into somebody's home and you're like, oh, wow, what was, minimum wage, $15 an hour or whatever it is in some states, when people are making $7 an hour and, they're gracious for it, but you get to see the wage disparity and what's going on in the States when people are almost trillionaires, and you got people who are making $7 an hour. We got a lot of work to do. And so it just kind of makes me realize like the world as a collective, we're separate. We are told that we're separate, but as a collective, we got to, really get on it and, make some change for sure. So that's what's been going on.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I could best explain this answer to the question by explaining like how I got into travel. I grew up in half my life I grew up in Baltimore County, Maryland, which is majority Black. And then my family moved to Frederick County, Maryland, which is very much Trump country. And so when I was in high school, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me. And I started going on YouTube and found people who looked like me, who were singing songs in Spanish and were talking about issues that I felt like I was dealing with. And I was just like, yo, this is amazing. I felt seen in a really weird way, I guess, because at the same time, it's different contexts, but similar issues. And so through that, I started becoming more interested in like, what does the Black experience look like all over the world? And so in Colombia specifically, I've been so grateful for, well, backing up a little bit, I come from also like a human rights background. And so work around like displacement issues and work around like, I don't know, like what does internal conflict mean for people who are Afro descendants, right? And so the amount of organizing that I've seen Black folks do in Colombia is amazing. And those movements are often led by really amazing Black women and also queer folks who are like risking their lives. I don't know, I'm gonna go too deep into that if I start talking about that. And so what I will say is that I've been really grateful for the people who I see who are like proudly and boldly fighting for Black people around the world to just be free and be happy and to like be liberated. And that has made me feel also like more empowered here, more empowered to like assist other people in knowing what's happening abroad as well. And also just think about like, what does transnational solidarity look like, and how can we do it in a way that like how do we do that when sometimes we don't even speak the same language, but people get around that, and it's been so amazing. Social media has allowed people to connect through pictures and memes sometimes, and we have Google Translate. And so like my understanding of race and privilege and all of that, I think has just been kind of elevated, or elevated is not the right word, but it has become even more so because of the experiences that I've had, and because of the really strong relationships that I've been able to make with people like all around the world. I think we're all fighting for similar things, and to the extent that we can support each other, it's like I don't know, we're just great is how I feel.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, so quickly, we had a question from the audience, and I'm just gonna ask you, was it essential for you to know the local language while living abroad, or did you learn it eventually? How did that happen for you? And anybody can answer.
Okay. So in Costa Rica, there's actually quite a bit of Ticos who speak English. And so I started studying before I got here. But to have meaningful relationships and kind of expand on the relationship that you have with other Ticos, it is important to know their local language. I don't think that you can have like a full you can make it by and talk to them, but if you want to have like a great connection with somebody, it's best to know their language. It's respectful. And then, Spanish is different in each region. So you kind of you can learn at your home country, but when you get to the place that you want to go to, like Costa Rica is formal Spanish, so they don't use tú, they only use usted. So it's kind of learning that, and it's kind of learning their slang. So you should want to, know their language and get around, and because not everybody's going to know how to speak English, and you're lucky if they do.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Bianca said. I knew Spanish before I went, and I think it really allowed me to have a great experience. But I will say that if you don't know the language yet, I don't think that should stop you, or like you should probably take a little extra precautions. But while you're there, there's so many different groups. There's couch surfing that has a lot of different activities for people to come together. There's language exchange groups too. And so like just be cognizant of that, and also recognize like that, yeah, it's like you should know the language because it is very much a respectful thing. At the same time that it could present you with some security issues. But if you do have like a real strong desire to go for really genuine reasons, especially, like definitely try to go and try as hard as you can to like absorb the language and make connections, even if it's kind of hard to communicate sometimes.
I will say really quickly, if you get lost, I swear you will figure out how to speak the language. If you need to go somewhere, you need to buy something, or you need help, you will figure it out real quick, because that has happened to me. I figured it out and I got to where I needed to go. So you will learn it if you need to.
Okay. All right.
And for the people who do have issues with the language, and in terms of like maybe you study the language and just can never, I'm horrible. I was horrible in my French class or my Spanish class. I was horrible. Like when you're abroad, you also realize that you don't use a ton of vocabulary. You learn to be very direct. Like so, if I'm lost and I want to get downtown, I'm on a bus somewhere, I'm trying to get downtown. Or maybe I don't know how to say, hey, listen, how do I find my way? Like all the elaborate ways I may say it in English. So I'll just say a landmark. And I'm like, okay, I'll say Socalo. And it's like, okay, well, that's the town square. So no matter what somebody can kind of point me in a direction and help me get back there. Things like, you don't worry about present past tense and all those things the same way. If I say, yesterday I go to the store, well, I went, so then you'll probably say, oh, you went to the store. Oh, yeah, it's went. Like, you learn kind of choppy, but it's, you slowly figure it out. So it's definitely possible.
Okay. All right. So, for Walter and Bianca, what is your profession in the country that you're in?
I'm a professor at a university here.
Okay, nice.
So I work remotely for a telehealth company. So I work with psychologists.
Okay, nice. All right. And for individuals in the audience who may consider moving abroad or, living in another country just like you are, what advice do you have for them? How should they prepare themselves for something like that transition?
Well, so Bianca, you want me to go first? Okay. I saw the microphone there. What I would say is the most important thing, at least from my end, was I essentially, for 2 years before I moved here, made a very conscious effort to make sure I had no debt. I know that's a challenge for different people in different ways, but it was like no restaurants, no going to the movies, no buying any outfits. Like I literally would like, I'm going, if I looked at this restaurant, and it could be anything, the Applebee's, warm brownie sundae ice, man, I used to love that thing. But I can get with that, that $10 I'm gonna spend on this thing or $8 I'm gonna spend on, how many tacos I can get with that. So I made a really conscious decision to not come here with debt, because I think I've met a lot of Black people in particular who have come to Oaxaca, loved it, wanted to stay, but they had so many burdens in the States with things that they had to pay that they unfortunately, they weren't able to stay. Now with things being online, there's a lot of opportunities to work, receive a salary in dollars and live in another country and all those things. But that would be my first advice, set of advice. I would also say getting in shape in some way. If you're not somebody that goes to the gym or runs and does all those things, because you're gonna get lost. And this, most of the people, when we go to places, we usually go to places that are hot. And you walking around and you got your backpack and you have some things, on your shoulders, and you have to figure out. And somebody says, hey, you ask somebody for directions here, and they'll say, okay, everybody always pretends they know. So they say 3 blocks this way, and then you realize, damn, this ain't it, or, they didn't realize it's a line on each corner of that area, and they just sent you to the first line, but there's a line on each corner and you still can't find a place. All these little things that happen. So I would definitely say, get your health together. I say get in shape. It's really get your health together, because I think that is just important in general, but particularly if you're going to go overseas. I'll stop there.
Yes, to the health part, because being in Costa Rica, there's a lot of inclines and we hike a lot. And probably about the first 2 months, I was almost having a heart attack every time we go outside and the people are so used to being in this climate and the structure of, kind of how the natural landmarks are. They sprint up in it, and I'm just like, pardoname, I'll get there when I get there. So I wish I probably should have worked out a little bit harder before I came to Costa Rica. But some of the things that, you can prepare for. Now, mine's a little bit different because it was a little bit easier for me to transition because, I don't have a husband or, I don't have kids or a house. So there wasn't as much baggage to transition from. But, I really did take that year prior, and just to make sure that I had an initial plan of, just like how much the savings, I wanted. I knew where I wanted to live, kind of just like how much, monthly I'm, going to be spending, and, what type of job offer, I'm really going to accept. So those things are really kind of important because in Central America, Costa Rica is on the more expensive side. So some people just want to come here and, like, which I did a little bit of, but, come here and kind of float the wave, but then it gets expensive and then they realize they ain't got no more money. So that you kind of just want to have an initial plan and really know like what province you want to live in. So it's good to just, visit. But a lot of things I did that most people wouldn't do or I wouldn't suggest, I didn't have like a hardcore plan on like my living situation. It just kind of worked out. And I just kind of like went with the flow of a lot of it. But just kind of, have a plan, have a decent savings. Coronavirus hit 2 months after I got here. So if I didn't have the savings, I would have been put in a really bad position. So you just got to be prepared for everything that could possibly go your way, especially if you're trying to work remote, because it does take a little bit more time to find a good remote position.
All right, thank you. All right, so as we're wrapping up the questions, final question for you is, would you like to stay abroad permanently? Maybe for Crystal, are you planning to go back abroad to live, or are you planning to return within the next coming years? I hope not. I just couldn't. Anyway, Walter.
Well, I can go.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to go back every day. I really enjoyed being in Colombia. I think the energy was really, you could really feel the energy in the air. I think it was really loud. Like there's music on the buses and there's music in the street. And like, I think Colombia has the largest amount of like public holidays in Latin America too. There was just a general feeling of just kind of like seize the moment, have fun for today because you don't know what's going to happen. And so, yeah, in the next couple of years, I am trying to figure out how to return. Hopefully it works out, and yeah, wish me luck.
All right.
I guess I'll go. Well, I have no plans on moving back to the States. Kind of following up with, Krista used the word energy, so I'll talk about energy. A lot of people will ask me, miss Black folks, or do you miss? They'll say some stereotypical, like fried chicken, or something. And I what I tell them is that it is amazing whatever energy you possess that you kind of emote. It is amazing how things come back to you. And so here I am in a place that doesn't necessarily have a lot of African Americans here traveling. We're not traveling that much anyway. But suddenly, I find myself bringing Black students here. So then I have these Black folks coming in the summer. Then I have them coming in the winter break. And then I have these expat Black folks that come out here and they spend their winters. And now suddenly when if anybody's staying here, 2 weeks or longer who's Black, some Mexican will send them my way. And so I'll get these random WhatsApp messages like, hey, they told me I need to know you. And suddenly we're going to the mountains or going to some waterfall together. But all that to say that, like, whatever is important to you, it is amazing how you can kind of replicate it, duplicate it, whatever the word would be. And so for anybody who is a little nervous about going to places where there are not a lot of us, I would just reiterate, it is amazing. Whatever is important to you, being abroad and being free allows you to put more energy into expressing that particular energy and passion that you have, and it's amazing. It'll come back to you. So I'll stop with that.
With everything that's going on, I don't really know if I'm going to return back to the States. Never say never, but I just like it here so much. I mean, I'm just really having a hard time really just thinking about my life returning there. Just especially with the relationships that I've cultivated. I love the culture. I love growing into the language. And just some of the greatness that I have here, I don't know if I'll find that or it'll be replicated back in the States. And just the people that I'm meeting from like all over the world and the opportunities that I'm getting that I probably wouldn't get back in this. Not saying I can't, but it's more freer here. And so, yeah, I don't really know if, never say never, but at the moment, I think I'm just going to like bunker down, let the United States figure out what they got going on, and as a collective, just trying to figure it out. So I'm just going to stay here in paradise and keep this as my home.
All right. So now we'll take some questions from our audience. And Rena, do you have any questions? Well, I don't know. Let me see if I can do it.
There's no questions that have come through, it looks like.
Okay.
There was one. Oh, was that by Walter about the hair care? Oh, never mind.
Oh, talk about it. Hair care, right? Hair.
Well, do y'all want to talk about hair? We can talk about hair. Because
Sure.
First of all, we know that it's a whole thing. And I know when I was going abroad, it was a few years, I think maybe like 3-4 years after I went natural, and I had never traveled abroad before. And so I didn't know what it was going to look like. When I was in Colombia, in the first city that I was in, it's a very metropolitan city, but the Black people didn't live where I was. And so there wasn't a lot of Black hair things either. So I was like, let me just make this simple. And I just did braids to make sure that I didn't have any problems, but I like to touch my hair. And so 4 weeks in, I took my braids out and then had to figure out what that looked like. And so, yeah, please bring hair products. Like you're going to be happy. You're going to be grateful for your past self, because I did not do that. And I had to go through the store and use Gorilla Snot, which I don't even know. It didn't work out, but in the end, it was okay. So bring hair products, please.
The struggle is real. I did not expect COVID-19 to happen. So I'm like on my last drops. I'm going to have to go through this whole process of trying to get hair care here. And, I got my weave on, so I got braids in here, and they are just struggling because I need my routine. My hair is just very used to it. And I can't go down to the store. I did find Cantu out of like this random pharmacy. So I'm gonna have to go back and I'll just take anything that is of Black hair care. But you gotta be prepared, load up, because you're just not gonna find it. That also goes for makeup. You're just not gonna find the Fenty Beauty 420 and above. It's just not gonna happen.
I will say, in Colombia, the second time I went to Cali, which I think is the city with the second largest Afro-descendant population in Latin America. And like people had their own businesses. There was a lot of Black-owned like fashion, hair care. It also has, I think I mentioned the Petronio Alvarez Festival, which is the largest or second largest Black festival in the world, which I would love to talk about if anybody wants to hear about that. And so within that festival, they also have a part where you just have, it's like artesanías, but I don't know how to say that in English.
Can you say it again?
Artesanías, the stuff where they sell stuff. They have vendors and people who are selling things and like hair. I see people asking about the festival, and so I'm gonna put it in the chat really quickly. And you can find YouTube videos because it's really amazing. And my experience was really transformative. Essentially, the festival was created by the city mayor to celebrate and disseminate the cultural traditions of the Pacific region, which is 90% Black. And during that festival, it's a whole week. People don't go to work. And every night you just have large festivals and large crowds of people who are really celebrating the traditions and the cultures, as I mentioned, because the Pacific region, in large part, because of the way slavery happened in Colombia, like was able to preserve a lot of Afro-descendant traditions, Afro-descendant cultural practices. And so the festival really allows people from the Pacific region to feel at home at the same time that they're really problematic things that happen, mostly from the mestizo people, the white Colombians who come in and like to take from it. For example, there was a white man who dressed up like a Black woman and was holding a Black, I hope this is okay if I say, it was a Black wooden penis, and was going around and taking pictures with people and talking about like, oh, like, it's so sexy and stuff like that. And again, like when you think about stereotypes of Afro-Colombian people and of people in the diaspora in general, it was really just disheartening to see that at a festival that was supposed to celebrate Black culture. But the festival, I think, had 100,000 people who attended last year every day. And so it's huge. And people talked about how, like, if you're separated from your family, for example, there was a war that was 54 years. And so a lot of people were kicked out of their homes. And people talked about that festival being the only way that they could like reconnect with family members that they hadn't seen in forever and friends that they hadn't seen. And when I went as like a Black person and as an American person, like because of my accent, people could tell I was different, but they were like, oh, like you're Black, let's hang out over here. And it was really interesting to see like all the Black folks on one side and the mestizo people on another side, often like just doing really kind of hurtful things, or at least I was hurt by some of the things that they were doing. But it was beautiful. And if you can, please like go on the YouTube and check it out.
All right. Okay, well, we'd like to thank our panelists for joining us here today. We really appreciate you sharing your experiences with us. And if anyone in the audience has any additional questions for you, if you would like us to share your information, please let us know, and we'll be happy to do so. Our next upcoming event is in 2 weeks, July 30th. It is the last episode in this series, and we are going to Wakanda. We are going to the motherland. All right, so we would look forward to having you guys join us on July 30th, same time, 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern time. Okay?
Thank you to the panelists.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
No problem.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Crystal, I'm definitely gonna have to check this festival out. I've never heard of it before. Yes. Thank y'all for such a great, just open dialogue and sharing your experiences. I was taking a lot of notes. Walter, I don't know about you, but I think I would miss some fried chicken, but I do agree with you that wherever you go, you can make it home. You can make it yours.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you can find some fried chicken. You'd be amazed. So
I was gonna tell seasoning. It'll be
I
different.
didn't say that part.
But you know what? The fried chicken in Costa Rica is so good. But the food in Mexico is fire. I'm trying to go to Oaxaca, Walter, so I'm gonna come say hi.
All right, well, we'll definitely reach out because I haven't been to Costa Rica, but I'm down.
Okay, and then when I go back to Mexico, I'm gonna come find you.
Sounds good.
Alrighty.
Thank y'all.
Let me say this. So if you come out here, you don't need the weave. You don't need any of those special hair products. If let's say you can't find them products before you get here, they're gonna love you here regardless. So you don't have to worry about it.
You know, I've been to Mexico City, and they accept me however I choose. I just like it because I like it. But they gonna get whatever I deliver.
Yeah, because I'm like this COVID doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon, so we might be missing out on some things.
Thanks. Alrighty. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Besos. Ciao.
Keep that glow.
Alrighty. Bye.
Ciao.
Walter, thank you so much for participating.
Thanks, Ms. Raina. As you know, I'm always try. We gonna do what we gotta do.
Everybody wants to come down to Mexico now, so
Right, I do.
You're gonna have to have some staff.
I mean, y'all are always welcome. I love hosting brown people out here. So it's just and Raina's been out here, so she can always say, hey,
I vouch for it, 100%.
We need a vacation.
For real.
And Trinidad
Yeah.
would also be on my list. My best friend at Morehouse was